Hello everyone and welcome to the event to talk about the Language Trends Survey 2022. My name is Vicky Goff and I'm the lead person for modern foreign languages in the UK at the British Council. And in a minute we're going to be joined by Dr. Ian Collin from Queen's University Belfast, who's the researcher for language trends, who will go through some of the results. And following that, we'll hear some comments from three panellists who are Kim Bauer, the President of the Association for Language Learning, Ollie Hopwood from ISMLA, the Independent Schools Modern Language Association, and Helen Myers from ALL London. So that's the format of the event. If you have any questions, then please post them in the chat and we can put the questions to the panelists afterwards. In the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat so we know who you are. And a recording of this event will be made available in the next week or so, and we'll be sending a link of that to you. So to start, just a little bit before I pass over to Ian about the British Council. Can I have the next slide, please? The British Council teaches English all over the world, but we're also really keen that people in this country, particularly young people, have a chance to learn another language at school. And that should be all pupils, not just the most advantaged. And we also think that young people who speak a different language at home should have the chance to have that language valued and recognised. Can I have the next slide, please? So Language Trends, which started in 2002, is an annual survey of primary and secondary schools in England, which collects information about language teaching and learning. And its aims are to look at how well policy measures are working in regards to languages and gather that through quantitative evidence and also through the views expressed by teachers. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to speak about the results for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a chance to hear from our panelists and then to hear answers to your questions. So Ian, over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Vicky. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the launch of Language Trends England 2022. My name is Ian Collin. I am a senior lecturer in modern languages education at Queen's University Belfast, and I am very privileged to be the lead researcher on the Language Trends series. Today's report is the 20th report in a line of language trends, and we do therefore have great longitudinal data over the past 20 years for the situation of language teaching in England. Since 2015, there's also been an annual report in Wales, and since 2019, a biennial report for Northern Ireland, and all of those reports can be found on the corresponding British Council country website. Just before we begin, a little bit about the research methodology. Language Trends is a quantitative survey that has practitioners in the classroom at its heart. And whilst it is quantitative in nature, it does allow teachers who are completing it to provide us with lots of qualitative data so that we really do harness the voice from the classroom. And that's something that's so important for policymakers to take note of. The research the questionnaires are sent to 6,000 primary schools in England and to all state secondary and independent schools in England. We have research ethics approval from our Research Ethics Committee here within the university, and the research has been conducted to the highest ethical standards. If we can move on to the next slide, we can see that we have got something to celebrate today in that we have got the best ever response rate in the history of Language Trends England with 1,693 responses. That's beating our 2019 record of 1,621, and therefore we can say with confidence that we have a very good basket of evidence here to bring to policymakers about the state of language teaching in England in 2022. So thank you to everyone who completed the survey and has helped us to reach this important milestone. If we move on to the next slide, we can have a look at the profile of primary schools who have responded to the survey. Our response rate was 12.7%, so in hard figures, that's 735 out of 6,000 primary schools chose to respond to the survey. Whenever we look at the quintiles for free school meals provision, which is a marker of social deprivation, we can see in the blue table at the bottom that our survey is receiving more responses from those schools that are in lesser deprived areas of England. So the current free school meals primary average is 21.6%. So in real terms, that's 1 in every 5 children in primary school in England is entitled to free school meals. That's up from 15.8% before the pandemic in 2019, and it is a significant jump. Looking at the blue table at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that a third of our responding schools are from the least deprived areas of England, and just 1 in 10 schools, that's 10%, from the most deprived areas of England. So we've got to remember that whenever we look at the data in a moment, that this could actually paint a more positive picture than is the reality in many schools. Moving on to the next slide, we can see that French remains the most popular language in our primary schools, and that's closely followed by Spanish. That's not mirrored later on at A-level, where Spanish is now firmly embedded as the most popular A-level language in England. And we attribute the huge French numbers at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 to the historic nature of many teachers in primary classrooms having done A-level French themselves back in the heyday, whenever everyone almost did French as a school subject. But also in this table, we can see some encouraging data for German with 25 responses and a Latin there with 11 responses. And of course, at Key Stage 2, schools are free to choose either a modern foreign language or an ancient language. Moving on to our next table, we can see the amount of time that is devoted to languages in primary schools. In the majority of schools, languages are being given 30 minutes to 1 hour per week. And there are very few schools that are teaching more than 1 hour per week. Now, I think this is something that we would like to dwell on in the report, because we do know from very recent research by Suzanne Graham at the University of Reading that if we want children to make progress in a language at primary level, i.e. learn more and more as they go through Key Stage 2, then they need to be having language lessons for at least 1 hour a week, and for that to be taught by someone who holds at least degree level in the language. And I think that's something that policymakers do need to take a closer look at moving forward. On to the next slide then. We can see that in England, 93% of primary schools are planning for progress in one language across the whole of Key Stage 2. And that's a growing trend, because our data back in 2019 was at 78%, and each year since we have seen that incrementally going up. So primary schools who are responding to our survey are doing exactly what government is asking them to do. Just to pause on this for a moment, in the other UK nations, it's not quite the same approach where schools are being encouraged to progress in one language. In Wales, with the new curriculum for Wales from September 2022, they're taking a much more plurilinguistic approach, a multilingual approach to primary languages, and encouraging a range of languages to be taught in the primary phase. Our colleagues up in Scotland have a very well embedded 1+2 approach to primary languages, where from year 1 pupils are learning one language, and from year 5 pupils are learning a second language. Northern Ireland being the only UK nation, of course, where there is no entitlement to primary languages, and that's something that we here would be very keen to change. Moving on then to our next slide. This shows us our data on international engagement in primary schools, and we have found in this survey a very alarming statistic. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of primary schools telling us that they have absolutely no international engagement is sitting at 67%. That is a huge figure and something that really is quite worrying. Whenever we look at the data for secondary schools, we can see that 45% of them are telling us that they have no international engagement. And in fact, when we ask secondary schools about the Turing scheme from the government to promote outward mobility from the UK, just 16, that's 16 schools out of 769 secondary schools told us that they had applied for and availed of Turing funding in this current school year. Now, of course, there's issues there with recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, but that's a shocking statistic that really needs to go up as England moves out of the pandemic. Independent schools are not immune to this phenomenon either, with 1 in 5 independent schools telling us that they have no international engagement going on within their school at the moment. So that really worrying, and one of the big things we have found by doing this survey, and that we can track longitudinally, there has been a massive change since COVID-19, and one that policymakers and head teachers really will need to take a very close look at, that international dimension. Moving on to the next slide then, we can see transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 remains a problem for everyone, I think, in England, or for the majority of people in England, but also in all Anglophone countries where languages are taught at primary. Nobody has really, to my knowledge, cracked the transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. When we ask secondary school teachers about their cohort in Year 7, what access do they have to information about the prior attainment in language learning at Key Stage 2, 75% of schools were telling us that they have no access to any information. That strikes me as something that could be easily solved at a local level by opening up dialogue with primary schools, and something that could be easily fixed. That's gone up from 71% in our survey last year in 2021. On to the next slide then, we can see at secondary level, the big three of French, German and Spanish do continue to dominate. And we had over 1 in 4 state secondary schools responding to the survey, very healthy response rate of 27.3%. The profile of respondent schools is similar to primary in that we do have more schools from more affluent areas responding. But the scary statistic here has been the decline in German from 65% in 2021 to 60% in 2022. That resonates with publicly available exam data at GCSE and A-level, and it's something that I do think we all need to be attuned to, with Germany being such an important trading partner for the UK. In terms of exam options in what we are calling lesser taught languages, we can see that there hasn't been that much change from 2021 to 2022. But it's still encouraging that schools are offering those lesser taught languages. However, whenever we look at data, for example, for GCSE Polish, we know that the entry for that is much smaller than the number of 16-year-olds who are of Polish heritage and who are L1 speakers of Polish in our schools. In fact, only around 1 in 9 Polish pupils is sitting a GCSE in the language. So there remains work to be done there to help those pupils who perhaps speak another language at home to receive certification in those languages. And right the way through the system up to university, it is important that universities recognise those qualifications, because quite often universities may discount an entry qualification in a language that is considered to be the pupil's home language. Moving on to the next slide then, we can see what support is provided for home or community languages, and these labels are really unhelpful. I think that we should just be talking about languages and not about home languages and modern foreign languages, etc. But other than French, German and Spanish, we can see that in the majority of schools they are paying the examination fees for pupils, but work with Saturday schools or supplementary schools is very underdeveloped. And 15% of schools, 116 of our 769 respondents, were telling us that they don't provide any support whatsoever. On to the next slide then. Here we can see the publicly available entry data for GCSE. So the blue line at the top of your screen is French, the red line is Spanish, the orange line is German, and the green line is other modern languages, so i.e. all languages other than the big three of French, German and Spanish, and Irish and Welsh. French remains the most popular GCSE subject, but Spanish is rapidly increasing there, and we expect Spanish to be the most popular GCSE subject by 2026 if current trends continue. The decline in German can be noted as well between 2020 and 2021, and as I always say, whilst it's really encouraging that the French and the Spanish are going up, it's not quite time yet for the fiesta, because those learners who are no longer gravitating towards German are invariably now gravitating towards Spanish or French. And that, of course, is a positive for French and Spanish, but we do have to be cognizant of the huge decline that we're seeing in German. In other modern languages, it's pleasing to note an increase from 2020. You may recall that entries plummeted due to the pandemic and the fact that pupils in Saturday schools and supplementary schools were unable to get certification for their efforts in their GCSE language learning. So there's some growth there in that, but much more to come. On to the next slide then, we can see from our survey data that on average 52% of pupils in year 10 and 51% of pupils in year 11 are doing a language for GCSE. That's a drop of 1 percentage point since 2021. It's not too much to be worried about, but it is very firm and robust evidence that the government is not going to meet its EBacc target of 75% of pupils doing a GCSE language for award in summer 2024. And indeed for 90% of pupils to be doing a GCSE in a language for award in summer 2027. Independent schools are also just about hitting the target there. It's sitting at 77% for year 10 and 76% for year 11. So they're on course to meet the EBacc target for 2024 certification, but a long way off that 90% that's needed for 2027 certification. Interestingly, there's been a drop of 7 percentage points for each year group since our 2021 survey. We don't have robust evidence as to why that has happened, but I could speculate that it may be due to the COVID-19 pandemic and pupils choosing not to take a language for GCSE. But again, that is speculation rather than fact. Over on to the next slide then, we can see our post-16 data at A-level. It's a different picture to what we note at GCSE, in the sense that Spanish, your red line, is now the most popular single A-level language subject on offer, followed by the French. And French had been the highest subject in languages ever since the dawn of A-levels back in the 1950s. A little recovery noted in the other modern languages. That's all languages other than the big three, Irish and Welsh. But the German, again, unfortunately, showing another decline. So I think it's really time for policymakers to sit up and to take note of this and to put in place an intervention for German in particular. Into our next slide then, we can see here that there are lots of good news stories available within our data. We can see that teachers are engaged in evidence-informed practice. Of course, teachers have been engaged in evidence-informed practice ever since the teaching profession started. But the two big things at the moment are NCELP, the National Centre for Excellence in Language Pedagogy, which is run between the University of York and the CAM Academy Trust, and Conte and Smith, two applied linguists and either practicing or former school teachers, are getting lots of mentions within our qualitative data. That's partly fueled by social media, but it is good that teachers are aware of that. As I say, teachers have always been involved in evidence-informed practice, but these two things are coming through really strongly in our qualitative data. We can see this year that a number of teachers tell us that they do feel supported by their senior leadership team. Now, that's not going to be the same in every school, and we can't generalise across the whole country. But teachers filling in the survey, particularly in the state secondary sector, do feel that there is a commitment from senior leadership to allow them to be developed as middle leaders and as the engine room of languages within their school. And above all, what humbles me every year whenever I read the qualitative data is there's huge collegiality amongst language teachers. They're probably one of the most enthusiastic group of teachers found in any staff room in any school across the country, and that enthusiasm and expertise of language teachers is something that I think we can celebrate. But of course that enthusiasm has got to be capitalised upon by the policymakers and by government, who set the weather and set the direction at a national level, and teachers can only control the weather within their own classrooms, and there's bigger forces at play from government, and I think that government could certainly learn a lot by listening to the voice of the practitioner in the classroom, of the teacher in the classroom. On to the next slide then, we can see our response rate from independent schools is sitting at a very healthy 33%, so 1 in 3 schools responding to us. And when we move on to the next slide and look at the data here, we can see that languages are in good shape in the independent sector. most schools offering the big three, and exam options being offered in lesser taught languages as well. Quite similar figures year on year, so there's no big change between 2021 and 2022. But it is interesting to note that 65% of independent schools offer Latin as a GCSE option. Whenever we ask that question in the state secondary sector, we find it is much, much lower, sitting at around 2%. And generally schools are in the southern half of England. It's therefore going to be really interesting to look at the data coming out of the Latin Excellence Programme moving forward. If we move on to the next slide then. Here we can see the level 2 qualifications in England in independent schools, and mainly here we have the normal GCSE as well as the IGCSE. So that's everything from me. There's an awful lot more detail contained within the report, and I would encourage you to read through it carefully whenever you get access to it. Lots of really interesting data. So thank you very much from me, and I'll pass over to Vicky.
Great, that's brilliant. Very concise and clear, Ian. Thank you very much. You need to get a glass of water before we come back to you with the questions. So now I'm going to pass over to Kim Bauer, who's president of the Association for Language Learning, to give us her thoughts on what she's heard about this year's survey.
Oh, thanks ever so much, Vicky. And I'd just like to extend a very warm thanks to Ian. It's a fantastic thing that we have in this country, a survey each year to tell us the state of play with modern language learning. It's really important, not just modern languages, but all language learning. So thanks very much to the British Council, to Vicky and to Ian for all the work that they do in producing such a concise survey. Yeah, I think to start off with, I think we all know that it's really important that to learn languages and to learn about other cultures, understanding and appreciating other cultures makes life richer. So it's really important that we do engage with international links and exchanges, and it was really sad and quite shocking to see the drastic decline in engagement with international links. 67% in primary, 45% in secondary schools don't have any international links. So I think as a community and as policymakers, something that we really need to do to support schools, senior leaders and policymakers in encourage them to put in incentives to help teachers move forward with the international engagement. And of course, there is the Turing funding. And we have a webinar in the ALL London site all about Turing funding, how to apply for it. And there's even a lady who will support you in writing an application. So let's not have a statistic like 16 out of only 769 schools have applied for Turing funding. I know it's been really difficult for teachers. I know you worked really hard this year and last year through a difficult, complex situation in the pandemic, but it would be brilliant if we could access more of that Turing funding in the coming year. And ALL will do everything that we can to support you in that. Something else that I'd like to pick up is that it's really important that we maintain the Key Stage 3 National Curriculum Purpose of Study, which is to liberate from insularity and to provide an opening to other cultures, to foster curiosity and to deepen understanding of the world. And in the narrow focus we've got at the moment on grammar, phonics and vocabulary, understanding the world in this way seems to have been a little lost. And I think it's really crucial at this time in our history, post-Brexit, with global migration, that languages has a significant role to play in Hawkins' 1987 apprenticeship of our young people as global citizens. So in terms of curriculum, it's really important that we think about what's missing from the narrow drive for the curriculum on offer. So perhaps we need to think also about new age relevant content, not transactional language, not buying a pretend ticket, but how to interact meaningfully in the target language. How about cognition and problem solving that our young people do in other subject disciplines? How about creating dialogic classrooms? How about languaging learning, where children learn to articulate their understanding of their learning so that their learning deepens further? How about incorporating aspects of bilingual approaches such as translanguaging, or including skills from EAL specialists and so on? And I would, another push here for a national languages policy. We've got a national languages strategy that is still relevant today, but because we don't have an all-party national languages policy to underpin any decisions made about every aspect of language learning, we don't seem to be able to move forward as well as many countries. For example, even Scotland has a 1+2 commitment to language learning, starting in primary school, which I think we would do really well to look towards. Another of the statistics that I found quite shocking was the decline in learning German, which is very worrying, 65% to 60% from last year. And also the fact that so 116 schools that offer any support at all for getting community and home language into children into exams. So it's really worrying, and ALL will be doing everything we can again to support both the learning of German and also to bring in to support community and home languages, so that our young people who've got other languages get another qualification in it. We've got a vast resource of over 1,600,000 learners in our schools who are plurilingual, have another language, at least one. Many of them are plurilingual, they have several, and they're not getting those qualifications. So it'd be really nice to see that in future. I think that's all I've got to say for now. Could I pass on to someone else, Vicky?
Yes, thank you very much for Kim. That's brilliant. And of course, you know, at the British Council, we're really keen on schools having international links, and we will be relaunching our international partner finding service in September. And we hope that we can support schools in finding a partner, in carrying out joint projects, and then in starting to think about visits and exchanges. And we have lots of advice on our website about that. So I'm going to pass over to Helen Myers now, Helen from ALL London, to ask for her thoughts on.
Could I just say, Vicky, about that absolutely brilliant the work the British Council does in linking schools together and making international links. So if you don't have one, definitely go to the British Council. It's a brilliant service that they offer.
Thank you. So over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the British Council for carrying out this survey and for inviting me to comment. The survey is clearly a really good starting point, at least, for discussing what the trends are. It gives an idea of trends, but I think it's the discussion, isn't it, that makes it really interesting and hopefully powerful. As you said, Ian, right at the beginning, this is meant to be an exercise to look at how policies affect trends, and we're really hoping that policy makers are going to look at this and really read it in detail, not even just read the headlines, really read the report to find out all of the threads that you'll find within it. Now, you know, we're all aware, aren't we, of how depressing, to be honest, it is to hear year on year information which indicates, frankly, a downward trend overall. You know, the provision in primary, the international experiences, the uptake at GCSE and A-level. You know, I love the positives, and I always love the way that Ian smiles as he presents everything, tries to make it so that we're not feeling too down about it. And I love the fact that you're really emphasising something that's so important, which is this collegiality, you know, collegiality, the fact that we do work together, the fact that we're here talking about it together. ISMA, ALL, ASCL, all of these associations which are interested in this. So it is good to have these positives. But I do think it is vital that we don't get distracted from what is the main matter of concern for the government and for our schools, and that's the uptake of GCSE languages, isn't it? Because that contributes to the EBacc measure, then it has a knock-on effect for taking languages further. So that's the area that I'm going to comment on. The EBacc figure is a focus for Ofsted inspections, and that's a good thing for us, isn't it, that they are looking into what provision there is for languages. It's certainly cited in reports where Ofsteds will say these are areas to improve if a school is not offering languages. So, I'm not surprised really to see in the report that senior managers are encouraging language departments to support take-up. And I think we have, to some extent, the EBacc to thank for that, because, yes, it's in their interest to make sure people are doing languages. But I would note that they are, for those that I know of, and certainly when I hear people talking about it, it tends to be that they're taking a pragmatic approach, whereby the more able students are placed on some sort of EBacc pathway or similar, and that ensures that they take a language. They're often encouraging the more able students to take a language through the way that they construct their option choices. But my concern, and this is what Vicky mentioned right at the beginning, because you were saying, Vicky, the British Council wants languages to be for everybody. We want it to be broader. And that's where I feel that modern languages are not promoted as much amongst lower attainers. Just as an aside, I suppose, or it could be part of it, I'm not surprised that the Spanish numbers are increasing, because rightly or wrongly, it is often seen or promoted, or people think of it as easier and more attractive to pupils. And that's where senior management teams wanting more people taking to do languages, they will encourage that. But we are really talking marginal increases here, aren't we? Because there's always this major issue of severe grading. Now, I have been told that this issue is no longer included in the headlines of a presentation because it comes up every year. It's a known and accepted issue. But I'm going to urge that we always keep it in the headlines, because this is something we want to draw attention to policymakers. It's an issue that has not gone away. And given the importance of this report and who's going to read it, I think it's vital to keep this issue in the headlines. I do note it is in the report, and that's why I'm saying we've got to say to people, read the report, read the examples of what people are saying. Just in case anyone has missed the meaning of severe grading, it's a situation where, on average, students of the same prior attainment can expect to get a lower grade in languages than in other EBacc subjects, the EBacc subjects of maths, English, geography, history and science. It's vital that this is addressed. So one thing, all right, I'm looking for something positive. Following years and years of drawing attention to this issue, and this has been done through ISMLA, ALL, ASCL, all of these associations all working together, we have drawn attention to this issue, and at long last there is a commitment to make some adjustment. It's to bring French and German in line with Spanish. And this has been confirmed in documents that we've received coming from exam boards, for example, from AQA recently. That is going to happen. It was lost in a way in 2020 because we didn't have the external exams, but this year there will be hundreds of children nationally getting 9s in French and German, deservedly so, and they wouldn't have done beforehand. So that's something to hold on to. But we still need to be aware that those numbers will still be below the EBacc subjects of history, geography, English and science, because still, although it's being brought into line with Spanish, there's still a gap with those. So that's for the EBacc. Just another note of warning, this year Progress 8 will come back into effect, and this is a counter pressure to the EBacc. The EBacc can be seen as good, it's encouraging languages, but the Progress 8 is bad. It's going against that, because what happens there? Remember that Progress 8 is that measure of 3 EBacc subjects plus English, maths, plus 3 other subjects. Now, the 3 EBacc subjects typically used by schools are the 2 sciences plus either history or geography. That's really a safer bet for being able to get a higher score. If you make languages part of your EBacc, it's likely to bring down that measure. And then if you put language into the bucket of the 3 other subjects, that will have an effect on that measure. So this is where we really do have a problem, and it's where, again, I can't stress enough, we've just got to deal with this. Of course, I'm really pleased to read some of the positive comments in the report, but I'm afraid I'm saying it again, really, we do need to stress that whatever changes are made in pedagogy and assessment, and I noticed that in the introduction, there's a lot of money that's going into looking at pedagogy, looking at assessment, this change in the GCSE, there's been a commitment there. But the reality is, whatever changes you make to your pedagogy, to your assessment, even if everything does get better in some people's eyes, that is not going to affect grades, because we have comparable outcomes for grades. So it's not going to affect that. So that is not going to give an incentive to managers concerned, and I can understandably concerned about the measures which are going to be published about them. So I would say please look at the section at the back, which I think is really good, the even better if that you've done. And to be honest, it does seem to me that there you've got really things which go counter to the idea that the pedagogy ideas and the assessment ideas are going to necessarily help. It's lovely to have in the conclusion the words "it is hoped that the impact will be a positive one," but I haven't seen any quotes from many people saying that it is going to be met, dare I say. So there we've got, you know, really someone saying from a quintile 5 school, make languages a priority and not an option. All pupils should be doing a language, but maybe not all for GCSE. Bring back more vocational language. So there are people who want people to be doing languages. But in particular here, the last one, changes to GCSE are soul destroying. We've worked so hard to produce resources to support students both in and out of the classroom. Changes seem to lack context, harsh grading, and the setting of questions in target language in the writing papers were the issues which need to be addressed. Baby out with the bathwater will deepen MFL crisis, in my opinion. So I'm afraid that was the last quotation that was given. But I think that's something where there are ideas in this report as to what needs to be looked at. And I so hope that people do read it really carefully and don't just look for things to prove their own points, which is perhaps what I've done. I don't know, but I feel it's definitely there. It's definitely an issue. So I think I've done my 5 minutes and perhaps more.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Helen. And I'd be really interested to hear from people in using the Q&A to tell us what you think about severe grading and the impact that it has on your school. And now I'm going to hand over to Ollie Hopwood from ISMALA, the Independent Schools Modern Language Association, to give us your thoughts.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'd first like to again thank Dr. Collin for an excellent piece of work. This is a data set which really helps all stakeholders in languages think strategically about our subject and understand where our priorities lie. So thank you again for that. I'm very pleased that there's so much evidence that schools care about languages. The response rate is high, the breadth of languages on offer is in many cases impressive, and teachers' appetite for improving their practice is as strong as ever. I also welcome the fact that the precipitous decline in language learning appears to have slowed, and credit goes out to all the hardworking teachers and supportive school leaders for helping this be the case. JCQ entry data does show us that in the last 5 years, languages as a whole has kept its head above the water, and government support of modern languages in the performance framework has undoubtedly helped here, as Helen was saying. But we do need to be cautious about what appear to be these rises, I think, in French and Spanish, and for a number of reasons, which I'll just briefly discuss. Firstly, it doesn't necessarily reflect increased participation in language learning in proportional terms, as we know that age group cohorts do vary in size from year to year. And as the report shows, there has been a very modest decline actually in the proportion of students entering GCSE. Secondly, there has been real variation between languages. Other modern languages, that category is more volatile than we would like it to be, and the picture is far less positive for German and to some extent less positive for classical languages. This is actually interesting in and of itself because it shows that the fate of modern languages is not tied specifically to pedagogical effectiveness as being from outside. German teachers are not worse than Spanish teachers and vice versa. I'm a little concerned overall by a narrowing of the curriculum to one language in primary and a choice of between 1 and 2 at secondary. I want students to be able to learn more than one of a selection of languages at all phases, as increasingly seems to be the international standard. We also need to see this data in the context of other critical data on the dashboard for modern languages, as it were, if we want to determine whether this potential turnaround is sustainable or can be enhanced. For that, we need enough teachers, enough new teachers, and enough pipeline teaching in Key Stage 3. On teacher recruitment, we have sadly missed our recruitment targets every year, I think since 2013. Using DFE data, I calculated this equates to a cumulative shortage of 3,000 teachers or more. We need to bear in mind too that European Economic Area nationals make up just shy of 30% of the incoming cohort of trainee teachers each year. We also know that around 30% of all teachers leave schools within 5 years of joining the profession, and I believe that languages fares particularly badly on that statistic. In terms of the number of hours in which languages are taught in schools, DFE publishes data on this, and we know that although entries are increasing in French and Spanish, this isn't necessarily being always reflected in the number of hours taught in those languages. The amount of French teaching in Key Stage 3 is not increasing. Actually, it fell 20% over the early 2010s and has not recovered in the last 5 years. Overall, across languages, the amount of Key Stage 3 teaching is not increasing at the rates that would be necessary to really expand modern languages in the way that we all want and need it to, certainly in terms of the government's ambition. Key Stage 3 teaching across all modern languages is barely creeping up year on year. This means that either the expansion that we see won't be maintained, or that it might be, but that teaching will be spread more thinly, which we know is not good for progress. On the number of languages teachers in the last 5 years, the number of teachers teaching French in all year groups has declined 4%, despite an increase in entries, and German down 21%. And teachers teaching Spanish is actually only up 13%, despite a much bigger rise in entries. Specifically in Key Stage 3, we have 5% fewer teachers teaching French than 5 years ago. If we really want to achieve a good turnaround for modern languages at GCSE, we need to think about the pipeline and ensure that we have enough teachers and teaching at Key Stage 3 today. Part of that pipeline, as Kim was saying, is giving students early on in their language learning careers that international contact and fulfillment that brings modern languages to life. Modern languages are not a sterile, abstract discipline, a mere intellectual endeavour. They are a vital medium for the free movement of ideas, thoughts, concepts and experiences. Particular concern for me, and this is my final thought, is German. Fewer entries, fewer teachers, fewer hours taught. This is not a good thing. If we accept the idea that the value of learning a language, and I think we all do accept this in this room, is something more significant than being able to speak a language on holiday or help boost UK trade by a fraction of however many %, then German is a subject which has a massive contribution to make to our curriculum. German is the first language of the largest number of our near geographical neighbours. It's the language of a huge amount of science, technology, politics and culture, past, present and future. The soft power of the German-speaking world is huge and growing. Germany is a partner nation, EU or no EU. Understanding the German-speaking world and understanding how the German-speaking world views us here in the UK and in England is always going to be important for us as a nation. What this year's report shows is there is nothing irreversible about what has been a tale of decline in modern languages. French is arguably starting to grow. Spanish continues to grow. Mandarin has a strong-ish foothold thanks to the Mandarin Excellence Programme, although concerns remained around its A-level. Primary languages are establishing. I think it's time we looked at why the Mandarin Excellence Programme has been successful and why Spanish is successful. Critical to this, undoubtedly, is international experience that others have mentioned. And I think it is time for us to consider something like a German Excellence Programme focused on resourcing, funding, timetable time, and incentives. Teacher effectiveness is not the problem. And that's, I think, my final thought.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ollie. That's really interesting. Unfortunately, Kim has had to leave us, but we do have, because she's working overseas, but I do have lots of questions which I'm going to put to various people in the panel. And the first one, actually, Ollie, you've already answered pretty much, is about why German is important, but it's also asking a couple of things about other languages. So somebody has said, what about Chinese and Arabic? And also, is the increase in Chinese due to the funding that those languages get, such as from the Mandarin Excellence and from SWIRES? Any thoughts from any of you on those? Ian, maybe to start.
Yep, thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you too to Helen and to Kim and to Oliver for their comments there on the report. Thank you very much for all those contributions. In terms of the increase in Mandarin Chinese, I mean, why is that so? The same with Arabic as well, I think was cited in the question. It's the same as anything. Whenever you throw money at something, then it does tend to increase. And we know from the Mandarin Excellence Programme that 16.8 million so far has been invested in that programme. And it's a great programme, and it's one, as Oliver has alluded to, we could extend into other areas such as a German Excellence Programme. I'm always a bit reluctant with the title of Excellence Programme because it tends to suggests that it favours the gifted and talented in our classrooms, whereas we would actually want it to have an impact across all young people, particularly those people who are in socially deprived areas, is where we'd want to target that sort of money. But thinking about the Mandarin Excellence Programme, as I said, 16.8 million. The teachers for that are largely trained at the IOE, the Institute of Education in London, and that then has a knock-on effect in that it becomes something that is quite centric to London and to the southeast. And we do see in our data that schools in the north of England are nowhere near where schools in the south of England are in terms of variety and diversification of languages being offered. Other money has come in for Mandarin through the Confucius Institute, for example, and again, as I started off with here, when you give something considerable funding, it does tend to have an impact. The same with Arabic. There has been some funding from the Qatar Foundation into schools, and again, that's had a positive impact. What I would like to see, I suppose, as a former school teacher myself and now working in initial teacher education, at a UK-wide level, I would like to see targeted support for the German and for the French and for the Spanish as well. I think that extra funding in schools which are in socially deprived areas is where that money needs to be targeted. And as I say, the notion of it being an excellence programme, I think we could do some work around refining that. So I hope that answers the question, Vicky.
That's great. Do either of you want to say anything about that, Helen or Ollie?
I mean, just I'd really like to support everything that Ollie said about German as well. You know, I think that's where Germany is our neighbours. Normally, in other circumstances, I'd be taking 5 coach loads of Year 7s to the Rhine Valley next week. We can't this year because of COVID situation. But I know, I'm absolutely sure that that's something which keeps our numbers up for GCSE German and beyond. In fact, next year we've got more people doing German A-level than French A-level. And I think maybe that, you know, it can be to do with an experience like that. And it is so lovely as a coach leader to hear children, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds saying, oh, I'm going to bring my parents back here. You know, it's that sort of experience. And it's a place where you can go on holiday and we can be promoting that. And it's a place where you can go along and practice your German as well. It's just a bit more difficult, isn't it, perhaps, to go to China to practice.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a couple of thoughts from me. The first one is that you know, talking about Arabic, we've been working with the Qatar Foundation International to promote the teaching of Arabic, but a big blocker is that there is no teacher training for Arabic at all. So the people currently teaching Arabic are generally unqualified, or people who have qualified in another language and happen to have Arabic in their heritage. So that's a really big blocker for that. And the other thing is, I've posted in the chat a report that we produced in 2017 called Languages for the Future. Which languages does the UK need and why? And we had done the same report in 2013 and 2017, and the same languages came out both times as being important for the UK in terms of economy, diplomacy, security, education, etc. And they were Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, French and German. So Ollie, I see you wanted to say something. You wanted to add something.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vicky. I think I just wanted to say that I think it's helpful for us all, and I think we've done this in this conversation, to move away from this kind of race to the top in terms of population size or GDP, in terms of trying to justify which language should be taught where and why. And I think what we have to remember also is that students legitimately might really enjoy one language and really not take to another one. I certainly experienced that as a linguist. And if we want students to pick modern languages at GCSE and A-level, and it's a competitive subject choice field, let's face it, there are lots of great subjects on offer, then we have to give them a chance at picking a language that they love. And the more that German is squeezed out, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat, at Key Stage 3, then the fewer chances that those students will have to fall in love with the German language. So it's really important actually that some of that breadth of study in Key Stage 3 is maintained. And what I would be nervous about seeing is this increasing retrenchment into a kind of single track approach all the way through primary and secondary, because then we lose opportunities for students to really grow their affinity with the various languages on offer in our various schools and communities up and down the country.
Great, thank you. And somebody wrote in the chat that their local sixth form has unfortunately dropped German, and as a knock-on, a number of the high schools have dropped it too because there's no kind of pathway for German. And I was going to say to you, if do you know if that's reversible? Because I do know that the Goethe Institute and others might have grants which might try and persuade them to keep German in place. So if you want to pass on your email address, if you think that that it might be reversible, then please do that. A couple more questions. One about primary, and Ian, you were talking about the transition to primary. So it's a primary teacher saying they would like to pass on information, but they're not sure what to pass on. Do any of you have any comments about that? Helen?
Sure. I know that I've seen several people sharing ideas as to what they do. So, for example, recently on Twitter, there was a really good form that Harris Federation use. So I'm sure that's the sort of thing which probably to get in touch with the secondary schools and say, what about this as a form, or, you know, it's really getting in touch with people, isn't it, to find out what people want and what people can use. I mean, just talking from my own experience, we have a little group which gets together normally every term. It hasn't been as much recently, but where you just get to know the teachers from the other schools. We're really there for sharing ideas about pedagogy and just enjoying each other's company. But through that also comes finding out what people are doing and deciding about what you want to pass on. So I think it tends to be on a local level. You'll find out what people want. Ollie,
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think inevitably in some settings that's easier to do than for others. In some schools, both the primary and secondary languages lead is going to end up sharing information in lots of different ways with lots of different people. And I know I'm aware of some local authorities where there has been some efforts to kind of coordinate that between groups of schools so that there is a consistency of information sharing. But I think certainly in the cities where the primaries feed into many secondaries and where the secondaries draw people to many primaries, I think there's probably a time of year when primary leads get exhausted trying to fill in the different bits of information, and secondary leads get exhausted for asking for it. And I think there are lots of kind of, on a personal level, understandable reasons why it doesn't happen as easily and as readily as everybody wants it to happen. And I think I certainly experience that sense of frustration every time when I see language trends. This is a nut that we've yet to crack, but I think that's why, not least also personnel changes from place to place on a relatively frequent basis, especially in those schools, I think, in the cities which have the more complex admissions patterns.
That's brilliant. And I think that ASCL has produced or is doing a pilot of a transition project. So what I'll do is when we send out the, we'll send you after this event the recording and so on. I'll try and remember to put a link into the ASCL transition document for you, if that would be useful. Another question, I think particularly to Helen and Ollie, is about could you explain why you believe the changes to the GCSE won't necessarily change the profile of results?
Shall I just start again on really repeating about severe grading? Because we have a system of comparable outcomes, which means that an exam board would have a profile of the prior attainment of a particular cohort, and then that's what they would have to be using in order to decide on the distribution of the grades. Whatever pedagogy you've used, whatever exam you use, you're going to end up with the same proportions. So whatever happens with the exam, you're still going to get the same profile of the outcome, and there's still going to be severe grading. So that's why it's not going to make any difference to that at all. And that's where I think, you know, so often we're reading things about increasing intake, and there's this problem, isn't there? And I do it too, of knee-jerk reaction, that you think, oh, that's the thing that's going to make the difference, and then people invest loads of time, loads of effort into that one thing without really looking at the whole picture. And then I suppose, as far as people's, because certainly I'm afraid the comments in the language trends about the new GCSE, the ones that I've read, are fairly negative, and a lot of that is to do with our utter frustration that we were not part of the consultation process. This was, whatever the outcome is, the thing that people are aggrieved about is that this was done and just presented really. And there were a few little tweaks that were made because of the fact that we raised things, and I would say it really is worthwhile doing what we did, because you can really see that there were a few changes because of the things that we asked, but really it should have happened at a very much earlier stage. And I know, Ollie, you've got very strong feelings about this as well.
Yes, that's right. I think one way of understanding, broadly understanding the UK exam system, is a grade 7, let's say, in Spanish doesn't tell you that the student is a certain level of Spanish. What it really tells you is where they are in the rank order of that cohort, more or less. And so what the exams do each year, there are more or less, and there is some detail to this, which we won't go into today, but more or less it's known before the students even sit the exams how many grade 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, 5s, 4s, etc. there will be. One of the risks as we move towards a new set of GCSEs that subject associations raised was that because the new exams will still have to produce low grades, as all exams have to produce low grades as well as high grades, then we're a little bit uneasy about the nature of questions which exam boards will have to ask, because they will have to continue to distinguish between students of different levels of proficiency. The number of things which exam boards can use to distinguish between students is arguably going down, because the subject content is much more closely defined. So my personal anxiety is that we'll end up with quite tricksy exams, quite frustrating exams. The kind of questions which currently frustrate teachers and learners, I fear, will be more prominent, and we will still be locked into the same grading problem which Helen has so eloquently explained.
Great, thank you. And we've got about 5 minutes left. So the final question is about how much traction will the report get? And I don't know if you want to answer that, Ian.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. So a press release did go out to all of the main newspapers in the UK, and a number of them have carried that today, from local papers to the Daily Mail have done an article, as has the Independent, and the Irish Times in Dublin has even featured an article on this of interest, which is a huge paper in the Republic of Ireland. So it has received significant media attention, and on today of all days to be trying to do a press release, I think it's good news for languages that we have been able to get a slot in all of the papers, because as everyone listening will appreciate, there's bigger things happening in 10 Downing Street than language trends, unfortunately.
Thanks. And I think it's worth saying as well that the DFE have been briefed on the content. The languages team within the EBacc team at the DFE have been briefed on the content, and as every year they are part of the advisory group for language trends and listen really carefully to what teachers are telling them in the replies to this survey. So we're coming to the end of the event. So what I would like to say is thank you to all of our speakers, particularly to Ian for putting together the report. Thank you for coming and listening, and also please make sure that you do take part in the language trends survey. When you see it, you'll get it in about January next year. So please make sure that you fill in the report when you receive it in your inbox. So thanks very much. We'll be sending you a follow-up where you'll receive the recording of the event and also the other documents that I promised you. And if the person who was talking about the German sixth form would like to get in touch, I'd really like to put you in touch with the Goethe and try and help you out with that. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for listening.